The First World War was meant to be the war to end all wars, but its crippling effect on the global economy and the harsh restrictions imposed on the losing side meant that by the 1930s, trouble was brewing. Adolf Hitler swept to power in 1933 in a wave of German nationalism. Japan had already invaded Manchuria and had bigger ambitions for its global empire. In the space of 9 months, starting in September 1939, Nazi forces rolled across Europe with the latest in mechanised war machines, taking in Poland, Denmark, the Netherlands, Luxembourg, Belgium and France. And that put the UK on the front line. The Battle of Britain raged in the skies with nightly bombings of the country's major cities. In London, the Blitz saw the city attacked from the air for 57 consecutive nights. But the UK's resilience caused the Nazis to call off plans for a full ground assault. In 1940, Italian forces pushed into Africa, invading Egypt and bringing northern Africa into the war. From there, World War II sped into overdrive, splitting most of the world into Axis and Allies. The Nazis invaded Russia. Japan continued its invasion of Southeast Asia. And on December the 7th, 1941, it launched an offensive that woke the war's sleeping giant. Japan's bombing of Pearl Harbor in Hawaii sent shockwaves through the United States, and after 2 years on the fringes, an attack on its home ground pulled the US out of the sidelines and into the battlefields. In 1942, the tables began to turn. Japan's navy suffered a crippling defeat as it attacked the US outpost of Midway. In North Africa, British troops drove Axis troops out of Egypt. The following year, the Nazis' drive eastward collapsed as a bitter Soviet winter led to the surrender of German troops in Stalingrad. In July that year, the Axis lost one of its original partners as Allied forces toppled Mussolini and restored Italy's king. But though the tide was turning, the war ground on. Then came June the 6th, 1944. D-Day, the biggest invasion in history. More than 5,000 ships, 11,000 planes, and more than 150,000 servicemen. Europe's major ports were heavily guarded, the beaches less so. So under a full moon, the Allies stormed them. British forces took Sword Beach and Gold Beach. The Canadians took Juneau, and the Americans, Utah and Omaha. With a foothold on the mainland, Allied forces were unstoppable. Paris was liberated in 2.5 months. And by April the 25th, 1945, Soviet troops from the Eastern Front had Berlin surrounded. On May the 8th, the war in Europe was over. In the Pacific, it continued for another 3 months before America's nuclear bombs forced Japan's surrender, ending what remains to this day the deadliest conflict in human history. Max Foster, CNN London.